Stocks gain after the US Federal Reserve holds on to its rate cut plan. Metals, utilities as well as the industrials lead the charge today, and mid-caps see a sharp recovery.
Rate gain perks up on bagging in order from a leading US rail service. Hinduja Global jumps on a plan to sell its optic fiber business and trim costs, while Wockhardt gets a leg up after it launches a QIP offer.
Gold scales to a new high of $2,200 per ounce after the dollar slips following the US Federal Reserve stance that keeps 3 rate cuts on the table for the year.
Indian Prime Minister speaking at the Rising Bharat Summit assures that India is set to witness unprecedented growth in the coming years. He adds that India will be a key driver of global growth, taking it to new heights.
Hello there and welcome to Business Lunch. I'm Nisha Podar, and with me as always is Archana Solanki. So Archana, today there is quite a bit of recovery as well as a rebound in the market that we are seeing. Let's take stock of the market then at the lunch hour. 0.75% up on Nifty 50 and 22,000 levels reconquered in today's trade after a few days of weakness that we had seen. And a lot of that is really coming in from the US Federal Reserve's stance coming in, and there is a lot of revival, and global cues actually impacted the global markets, including India. Taking a look at Sensex, over 500 points gain. Bank Nifty is also taking the lead, 0.89% up in trade, and mid caps, that is one pocket which got the maximum drudging and now has recovered with a greater force. So advance decline ratio heavily in favor of the advances today, and just a few auto counters are in the red zone today when it comes to Nifty 50 components, and a few other biggies like Bharti Airtel, UPL, Infosys and others. So that's the snapshot of the market. But let's begin Business Lunch by focusing on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's statements from the Rising Bharat Summit. He has promised to make the next 5 years a period of unprecedented growth as well as prosperity, delivering the keynote address at this particular event. He also declared that the government is already working on a blueprint for its third term and preparing a roadmap for the next 25 years. Listen in.
हम अगले 25 साल का रोड मैप बना रहे हैं और अपने तीसरे टर्म के पहले 100 दिन का प्लान भी बना रहे हैं। सिर्फ 10 साल में 25 करोड़ लोगों का गरीबी से बाहर निकलना, क्या ये ऐसे ही हो गया होगा क्या? सिर्फ 10 साल में भारत का 11वें नंबर से 5वें नंबर की इकोनॉमी बन जाना, क्या ऐसे ही हुआ होगा क्या? नीयत सही तो काम सही। और नीयत कौन सी? नेशन फर्स्ट की नीयत। आज भारत वो पैसेंजर बन चुका है जिसके बिना ग्लोबल फ्लाइट उड़ान भरने की सोच भी नहीं सकती। अगले 5 साल में भारत वो पायलट बनेगा जो ग्लोबल फ्लाइट को नई बुलंदी की तरफ ले जाएगा। अगले 5 साल अनप्रेसिडेंटेड ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन के होंगे। अगले 5 साल अनप्रेसिडेंटेड ग्रोथ के होंगे। अगले 5 साल अनप्रेसिडेंटेड एक्सपांशन के होंगे। अगले 5 साल अनप्रेसिडेंटेड प्रॉस्पेरिटी के होंगे। और ये मोदी की गारंटी है।
Moving on, a new strategic disinvestment policy and asset monetization plan, the Infra Bank and the Bad Bank, or NARCL. These are some of the important budget announcements made by the government in February 2021. 3 years on, much of these policy announcements are still struggling to take root. As part of our ongoing election series called Election Exchange, CNBC-TV18 Sapna Das takes stocks of the ambitious plans that will form part of NDA-2's unfinished economic agenda. Sapna, where's the gap between the plan and implementation on larger divestment or infrastructure?
Well, each of the ambitious plans have various facets that took a lot of time to be addressed, or the plans were simply not implemented. So let's take it one by one, starting with privatization and disinvestment. One of the government's boldest initiatives was a plan to privatize government-owned companies. In the FY22 budget, the finance minister said the government would privatize 2 public sector banks and 1 general insurance company. But there has been little action on this front. We are now given to understand that privatizing one of the non-life insurers may not be on the agenda anymore, because 3 of the 4 companies on the list continue to be in poor health. Meanwhile, no PSU bank has also been formally identified for privatization. There has also been a lot of talk of other disinvestments as well, like the Concor privatization, which never saw the light of the day, while privatization of companies like the Shipping Corp and BML have been mired in the demerger of the company's non-core assets. So for now, privatization of IDBI Bank is the one big hope. One must also note the government's disinvestment targets have become smaller over the last 2 odd years. And from this year on, the term disinvestment receipts has been dropped from the budget. However, the government says it will continue to stick to the privatization agenda, though it will be doing this silently. One of the other big announcements this government made was the building of a 100 trillion rupee national infrastructure pipeline. This may have also hit a speed bump simply because the government is likely to have fallen short on its aim to fund 43% of the pipeline over a 5-year period ending next fiscal. NAFED, which was created for the sole purpose of financing this infrastructure pipeline, has been unable to lend the 5 lakh crores as was planned. Instead, NAFED's lending target has actually been lowered to 3 lakh crores with a new deadline of FY26. Also, 14% of the infra pipeline was to be funded through the 6 lakh crore asset monetization program. But in 2 of the first 3 years of the program, the government may have actually missed the monetization targets. A third avenue of funding was through higher central and state government capital expenditure. But from this year on, the centre has begun reducing the pace of capital allocations. That brings us to the third big plan, the setting up of a bad bank to tackle bank NPAs. Set up in 2021, the bad bank was to take over 2 lakh crores worth of stressed loans from banks by March 2022. However, that process started late. NARCL is now slated to buy 1 lakh crore worth of legacy loans from banks only by the end of the current financial year. So this also is running behind schedule.
All right, quite an exhaustive report by Sapna Das. Now, let's focus on some important news coming in from the courtrooms today. And the Supreme Court has dismissed the application seeking the stay on appointment of the election commissioners. And the court observed the stay under the new law could cause uncertainty, especially with the elections nearing. Now, remember that this comes a day after the centre had defended the selection of the 2 new election commissioners by a committee that excluded the Chief Justice of India. Now, the Supreme Court grilled the centre and said that the selection panel could have taken 2 to 3 days to review the names, and also raised a matter of concern over how the appointments were really done. So it's an important case right ahead of the union elections, Archana.
Right, on that note, we'll slip into a short break, but on the other side, we'll get you key excerpts from our exclusive conversation with JSW Group's Chairman and MD Sajjan Jindal. Stay tuned, we'll be back. Welcome back. You're watching Business Lunch on CNBC-TV18. The big update, shifting focus to auto sector now. JSW Group and MG Motor India have joined forces with an aim to focus on creating a robust EV ecosystem with forward and backward integration of the supply chain. They've also unveiled Cyberstar, a pure electric long-range premium car. In fact, we spoke to Sajjan Jindal and Parth Jindal on the EV launched, investment in the auto industry and much more. Take a look.
The whole ecosystem over the next 7-8 years, we would be investing close to $10 billion in the auto industry, in the new energy vehicles, including buses, maybe trucks tomorrow, commercial vehicles. Because I really believe that if India has to change, and if India has to save its import bill on fuel, and if it has to become Atmanirbhar on its own energy sources, then we have to move to the new energy vehicles.
What I can assure all the customers and all the viewers that it's an unbelievable price for the features that the Cyberster brings to the table. Frankly, to me, it looks like a Ferrari. And when you hear the price and when everyone hears the price, it's gonna be pretty awesome.
All right, the entire top team of JSW Group talking enthusiastically about their EV pitch. But remember, steel is the flagship for that particular group. Let's hear out Sajjan Jindal on various business plans when it comes to steel. Also, they entered into renewable business and also listing of the cement business. Listen.
We are right now in five verticals: steel, energy, infrastructure, cement, and paints. These are the 5 businesses that JSW Group is involved with. Steel is the primary mover, and now we are 28 million tons, and in next 3 months we are commissioning our 7 million tons more capacity. So we'll go to 35 million tons in the FY25. So that is a significant capacity, and we are doing a brownfield expansion in our existing plants to take by the end of 2030 we should be close to 50 million ton capacity. That is our plan. Similarly, in the energy, we are really focused on our renewable energy, and we are really pushing hard to build more and more capacity in the renewable. Our stated goal is that by 2030 we want to be 20 gigawatt renewable company.
Inorganic expansion in terms of acquisition of a stake in NMDC. What about the cement business listing?
Cement, I think we are already planning sometime this year. We would be looking to do the IPO.
All right, shifting track now. SEBI chairperson also addressed the News 18 Rising Bharat Summit in the national capital. She underscored the need to democratize India's capital markets and promised once again to make mutual funds available in 250 rupee sachets for all investors. Take a look.
We know the entire story about how the shampoo market in India exploded when it moved from bottles to sachets, and people could afford to buy a 1 rupee sachet or a 2 rupee sachet of shampoo, but could never have afforded to buy a 100 rupee bottle. The market just exploded. So our objective is that in similar vein, we are looking to do sachetization of all our financial products. Mutual fund industry tells us that a 500 rupee per month SIP is profitable for them. While many of them actually offer as low as 100 rupees a month, it is not profitable. World over, people cannot understand how a $3.50 per month investment can be made viable, but it is the magic of digitization. So for me, the journey of democratization is all about the journey of digitization. One of my favorite products for the future, REITs. I believe that there's just so much latent demand in our country for real estate. Over the next 10 to 15 years, the REIT, InvIT and Muni bond market will be as large as our equity market today, 1 time GDP.
All right, a lot of important comments coming in from the SEBI chairperson. Let's, on that note, slip into a short breather on Business Lunch, but don't go anywhere because we'll be getting you the biggest international event. The US Fed keeps the rates unchanged and reiterates its guidance of 3 rate cuts, the quarter point cuts in 2024. Now, we'll tell you all you need to know about its impact and the way forward. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Business Lunch. A quick look at the market at the moment. And yes, the market remains on status quo mode with the gains being upheld. But we'll have to see on the other side as well. Slight bit of cool off, not even to mention. But then remember, there is a fair bit of volatility in only 150 points kind of a range when we talk about Nifty 50. So at the moment, gaining 0.75%. Remember, big boy from banking space, HDFC Bank, as well as big boy Reliance Industries and L&T are the biggest providers and contributors to Nifty 50 today. But in the last few minutes of trade, some of the counters which have lost ground, namely HDFC Life, ONGC, Apollo Hospital, Nestle India, they have seen some bit of profit booking. So keep an eye out on the markets at the moment, and it is looking buoyant. And it is likely to be coming in largely from the global cues that are we are really getting today. So let's get straight to the global cues. The Federal Reserve left the interest rates unchanged at the conclusion of its March meeting and stuck to its forecast for 3 interest rate cuts this year. Let's listen into what the Fed chair had to say on the inflation trajectory and the growth prospects and many more aspects going forward.
Certainly hasn't improved our confidence. It hasn't raised anyone's confidence, but I would say that the story is really essentially the same, and that is of inflation coming down gradually toward 2% on a sometimes bumpy path, as I mentioned. I think that's what you still see. We've got 9 months of 2.5% inflation now. And we've had 2 months of kind of bumpy inflation. We were saying that it's going to be a bumpy ride. We consistently said that. Now here are some bumps, and the question is, are they more than bumps? And we can't know that. That's why we are approaching this question carefully. It is very important for everyone that we serve that we do get inflation sustainably down. And I think the historical record, every situation is different, but the historical record is that you need to approach that question carefully and try to get it right the first time and not have to come back and raise rates again, perhaps, if you cut inappropriately, prematurely.
In fact, staying with the Fed decision, we now have CNBC's Steve Leisman joining us with all the highlights of that big decision, the Fed's economic forecast going forward, and more. Steve, over to you.
The Federal Reserve leaving interest rates unchanged at 5.25% to 5.5%, and leaving in those 3 rate cuts, projecting a year-end funds rate of 4.6%. I'll get back to that in just a second. They see the economy expanding at a solid pace, same as they did in the last statement. Inflation has eased, but remains elevated, same as the last statement. If there's a theme developing here, it is. Not much change. Only one change, actually, about job gains remaining strong, no longer saying they've moderated, saying the risk between employment and inflation goals are moving into better balance. They also said they still do not expect it will be appropriate to cut the target rate until there's greater confidence inflation is moving towards 2%, which is to say they don't have that confidence yet, and so they're not projecting when those rates might be cut. On the projections, pretty interesting here. Big boost to the 2024 GDP outlook to 2.1% from 1.4%. A tick lower on unemployment, down to 4%. This is the 2024 year end. 2 ticks higher on core PCE to 2.6%. And yet, more growth, more inflation, lower unemployment. They left those 3 cuts in place of 4.6% for year end. They did skew a little bit more hawkish, and I'll get to that in a second. I will tell you they cut 1 rate cut away from next year. They went to 3.9 from to 2.39 from 3.6, and for 2026 to 3.1. And a tick higher, by the way, in the long run rate. They say they remain highly attentive to inflation risks and ready to adjust policy as needed. Guys, I don't have a chart for this, but let me just tell you. In the January projections, there were 5 officials below that median of 4.6%. Now there's only 1. So a lot of people who were more dovish came up, and they're more in line with the committee. But it is an interesting question right now. The Fed sees more inflation, higher growth, and yet they left those 3 rate cuts in place, at least for this year, taking 1 away from next year.
All right, Steve Leisman there analyzing the Fed Reserve's policy statements, and definitely 3 rate cuts are expected, but an eye on the inflation and growth is expected. So that's the biggest takeaway. And in the final update from the global market wrap this afternoon, well, the investors will be tracking the Bank of England's decision due later today, and the BOE is likely to leave the rates unchanged at 5.25%, and this comes a day after the inflation in the UK fell to its lowest in 2.5 years. The larger than expected fall in figures was welcome news for the policy makers there in the UK. However, the Monetary Policy Committee has been reluctant to offer strong guidance on the timing of their first rate cut. So all eyes would be on the central banks for the global market movement.
All right, let's shift our focus to the war in West Asia. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that the negotiations to secure a ceasefire in relation with the release of the hostages held by Hamas is nearing a conclusion. However, Hamas offered a counter-proposal to the pitch made by Israel. In response, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that the counter-proposal delivered last week included the release of Israeli hostages for 700 to 1,000 Palestinian prisoners was unrealistic. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who's on a trip to West Asia, held talks with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He's set to meet other Arab leaders in Cairo before heading off to Israel on Friday.
All right, with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Business Lunch. But don't go anywhere. Mid-Cap Radar comes up right next. Thanks so much.